I did not like what Nazism was doing to people.
Never was so scared in my life.
First time no more.
I decided to go over to Europe, fight them over there.
I'm at home and I feel fine.
He had been rejected because he was black.
These type of attitudes were across Canada.
Here comes the rain again.
This made it harder for black Canadians to list in the Canadian military.
Seems like
We were proud to be the trained soldiers because I felt I was part of something.
These men were trailblazers, and people couldn't dismiss them anymore. They couldn't dismiss us as a people.
One of the most terror-filled psychological weapons ever devised, the German V-1 cross bomb, made its debut in the London skies.
I landed in England. It was there that I first saw my first buzz bomb flying over the top of the buildings.
It's summer, 1944. London, England is under attack by German V-1 bombs. And a young black Canadian soldier named Robert Bud Jones is in the fight of his life.
Little sparks in the sky, and you could hear them in the air buzzing. Once the motor stopped, there was a complete silence. That means to say that they were on their way down. They would explode on the ground, and they're devastating if they have a direct hit to a house or a building or anywhere.
Soldiers, when they first see what's going on out there, it makes things real. It's not a make-believe enemy, and they're there to kill you. So Bud's now realizing that he now have to get rid of the little boy that came from Canada. He's now a man that is in the middle of a war.
Before he passed away in 2021, Jones was one of the last surviving black Canadian veterans of World War II.
I learned slowly that death didn't really bother me.
Veteran John Olby enlisted at 20. He is now 99 years old.
I was quite a young fella. We had a bravado about us. There was two of us, Verbal Travis and myself. And right after the holiday, we dressed up and went to Windsor. We had suits on. We thought we were sharp. And we had the big hats, you know. And we walked in, and the fella said, "What section of the army you want to go in?" "Yeah, I want to go in the Army Corps." Sounded glamorous, you know. Seeing pictures of tanks running across the prairie, the dust flying.
Olby's from Chatham, a town in southwest Ontario where the Underground Railroad delivered black Americans from slavery to freedom. From the gunner's seat of a Sherman tank, Olby fought to free others.
My first experience was seeing a gun carrier roll over. And then I seen a tank, I think it was a BCR, burst into flame. Just boom. Guys didn't get out. That one. Didn't see anybody get out. That's the first experience I had. And then it was all hell.
These men were trailblazers, and they really had an impact on the military. They came in and they said, "We're here," and they were effective at doing their jobs. Then people couldn't just dismiss them anymore. They couldn't dismiss us as a people.
Thousands of black soldiers served in the Canadian Army during World War II.
It's important to know about the contributions of black soldiers because at many times their stories were not told.
In 2008, Kathy Grant conducted a series of interviews with as many black World War II veterans as she could before they passed away. She uncovered a lost Canadian history.
The interviews that we have collected started from me taking a look at the Veterans Affairs Canada website and noticing an absence or a void of Black Canadian interviews. The next certificate accepted by Bud Jones on behalf of Clarence Trim, who was killed in action at 21 in World War II. Having them now is important because most of these veterans have passed away, and it is remarkable to see them sharing their stories. It's like a living memory. It's like living history. It's important, but it's also keeping my promise to my dad.
Kathy Grant's father joined the Canadian Army in 1942.
During World War II, the German submarines were shelling all the sea lanes, and many of our Caribbean islands were struck. And we West Indians, being very patriotic to the empire, we felt we would like to come to Canada to obtain military training whereby to do our part in winning the war.
My father was a World War II veteran who volunteered to fight for Canada, and he kept all of his pictures, connections with his friends, all of that was very near and dear to him. But before he passed away, he said, Kathy, I want you to ensure that the Canadian government, as well as Canada, recognizes all of its Black veterans that don the Canadian uniform. I created my Facebook page, Black Canadian Veteran Stories, to honor my dad and also to show some of the images that he had captured over the years, and also to get individuals to share their photos as well and their stories.
My family came to Montreal via the Underground Railroad in 1843. My great-grandfather, William, was a barber in Montreal, and he treated his barber shop as a station. He would conduct runaway slaves from Lower Canada to the black settlements in Upper Canada. 1925, just prior to the Depression years, I was born in St. Henry, which is a district of Montreal.
The Depression impacted everybody, especially within the Black community. There were no jobs, and some of them had to go on a type of relief.
My dad, he was supporting 6 children just on relief. Dad, he was what they call a standby porter, where if a porter who had a regular job was either sick or unable to make his run that day, he would replace him.
A lot of times the only jobs that were available were that of a porter. They couldn't even go into a store and see someone of color serving them. The opportunities weren't there.
But the war created opportunities for Black men like Montrealer Welsford Daniels.
It wasn't so much that we wanted to go. I was earning about $6 a week, working 6 days a week, but the Army was offering about $9 a week. So 4 of my friends and I, we decided, well, gee, let's join the Army.
I joined up in the Canadian Army, the active army. What prompted me to do that? Well, I don't know if it was because I wanted to save the world. I was more interested in seeing the world.
At the time, there was a mistake made in my birth certificate of 1 year where it said I was born in 1924 instead of 1925. And I took advantage of that and joined the active force. The first day out, when this burly sergeant major approached us and formed us up, and when he got to me, he's looking down, and I'm looking up, and standing at attention, and he says, "Young fella," he says, "Do you shave?" And I proudly said, "No, sir," because I only had one little curly hair there. And he says, "Well, start tomorrow." And I became a man.
Initially, I had some really very negative attitudes about Canada in particular, because as a community, we'd been kicked around. We couldn't go places. We couldn't go into restaurants. We couldn't go into theaters. We couldn't go into skating rinks. There were just so many things that we couldn't do. We were called all kinds of names and so on like that. And so you come out of there with some pretty negative attitudes. So with all of this in mind, bingo, here's the war. Now, do I join? And do I go running overseas? Or what do I do?
World War II was an opportunity for us to be seen as a part of the total. In order for the system to change, you need to have a visible champion.
A champion emerged out of Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. In 1940, a 25-year-old named Sam Estwick volunteered to join the war.
I was going to work the afternoon shift one day. I saw people looking out over the ocean, and I turned and looked. And for an arc of about 170 degrees, the horizon was filled with ships, all types of ships. I think I counted over 70 ships. I came home that night and turned on the radio to hear the midnight news, and over half of those ships were in the bottom of the Atlantic. Now, from our house, the ocean was less than a quarter of a mile, and realizing that the enemy out there would be more than likely shooting at the mines and collieries. My mother would be in between. That's why I decided to get in. Let's go over to Europe and fight them over there.
My dad was very much a family man. He loved his mother and he wanted her to be safe and sound. And when the convoys were leaving, my dad could see them because you're seeing those warships going. That makes it very real.
Estwick, a whiz kid, set his sights on the Royal Canadian Air Force.
From the recruiting information that he would have seen was that somebody with his technology background, mechanics and mathematics and engineering, that sort of knowledge would be useful to the Air Force.
They were advertised looking for fighter pilots, and they wanted people who were small and muscular. I had been boxing, I'd been in pretty good shape, and I felt I'm small enough to fit in the cockpit of a fighter.
When Estwick applied by mail, the Air Force responded with open arms. Then recruiters met him face to face.
So at that point in time, they knew that he was Black. And he got a letter in response to his application. Mr. Sam Estwick, Glace Bay, Nova Scotia. Dear Sir, receipt of your letter of February 24th is acknowledged with thanks. The fullest consideration has been given to your application, and there does not appear to be any trade or category for which you would be suitable. He had been rejected because he was Black.
(1941). Sam Estwick is rejected by Royal Canadian Air Force recruiters.
He had been rejected because he was Black. So that's when he took it upon himself to write to his Member of Parliament. MP Clarence Gillis was a union man, an MP for the workers. I don't think for Clarence Gillis that color had anything to do with it. Here's somebody who meets the mold of what you want for this job and needs a job. Why aren't you giving it to them?
As the war began, the Royal Canadian Air Force copied regulations from the Royal Air Force in Britain, including its Europeans-only policy.
Once the Royal Air Force was formed on the 1st of April 1918, all visible minorities were barred from joining the Royal Air Force. these policies mirrored what was happening in British society, where they believed that only white people were capable of true military leadership and true capabilities in terms of being able to use the weapons that were given to them. And if we look at Canadian society, these type of attitudes also were quite pernicious. They were across Canada. And this made it harder for Black Canadians to be able to enlist in the Canadian military.
People of color were welcome only in the Canadian Army. Both the Navy and the RCAF barred non-whites. But history was about to change.
Clarence Gillis brought it up in the House of Commons, and then there was a whole bunch of correspondence that went back and forth. That my dad had to pass a test, and he passed quite well. Then they asked him if he was interested in this new thing called radar. And that's where he started his military career.
Sam Estwick actually joined a very elite group. These were radar mechanics. Radar at that time was a big secret. Sam Estwick, within the space of a year, goes from being rejected into a trade that was restricted.
The RCAF lifted the ban in 1942. Until then, only 10 Black men had broken the color barrier. But they were now joined by Sam Estwick and pilot Alan Bundy.
Bundy was such a big deal that his picture was in the newspaper right from one coast to the other. The RCAF wanted to let people know that they had changed their policy and that they were being very, very broad, quotes-minded.
The Black men were able to be visible. They volunteered to fight, and people could see them all over the place. When you are in the face of people, even if they don't like you, they've got to recognize that you are there.
In the same year, Owen Roe left the Caribbean with a goal to join the Canadian military.
300 people from the Caribbean, from Barbados, Jamaica, etc., met up here, and we blazed a trail by going to Canada and taking our training there.
On his 19th birthday, he boarded the ship. It was called the George Washington. It was an American ship. And they were headed first to New York, and then they were going to be taking a train to Montreal. The first sight when they came into New York Harbor was the Statue of Liberty. Something about the Statue of Liberty and freedom resonated very much with my father as well as the other men.
So I enlisted formally in the Canadian Army, and we had to make the transition to a new culture and the military discipline that prevailed then.
Like Owen Roe, Black volunteers and conscripts around the world put their lives on the front line for Britain.
Britain has far-flung colonies all over the world, and you would have found the racial makeup of the Allied Army at this time to be quite diverse, with Black and brown bodies serving in extensive ways.
I did not like what Nazism or what Nazism was doing to people.
I must tell you, this stuff they had given you from the day you were born, that you were British, and Britain was at war, and you had a moral obligation to be part of their defense. Being fired at sometimes, that wasn't pleasant. But overall, I didn't regret it.
They did whatever they had to do to make themselves available to go in defense of Britain.
As Black men signed up to fight, Black women joined the Canadian Women's Army Corps. And in civilian life, other Black women rolled up their sleeves.
I worked at Nordine's aircraft, which we did the work on the plane.
The Norndon factory, near Montreal, produced training aircraft for the RCAF and Britain's RAF.
We riveted the wings, all the way along the wings and all that sort of thing. That's what we had to do. We used to put little notes on the wings sometimes to wish the fellows well. We were just cheering them on, sort of thing. And I worked on a night shift. You got a better salary than you did for the day shift. Then during the day, I used to have a little part-time job minding children.
The black woman, they really carry the load. From an economic perspective, the black women now had to go out. They had to make sure that they can actually take care of their family.
Oh, it's very lonely knowing that he was going overseas, and you worried all the time about that everything would be all right with him.
Gertrude's boyfriend, Wellsford Daniels, had a dangerous but critical job as a signalman.
The signals were paramount, that their use of senders and receivers were very necessary communication equipment. You had to learn how to operate the Morse code.
Signals Corps is the part of the Army that's responsible for radio communications, telephone communications, and also had dispatch riders, people riding on motorcycles going from one unit to another carrying important messages.
The forces of liberation move to their rendezvous with destiny. The invasion is on.
D-Day, June 6th, 1944, 5:30 in the morning. Allied ships blasted German positions on the Normandy coast. Then, 156,000 Allied troops, including 14,000 Canadians, stormed the beaches. The advance lasted well into the evening.
D-Day had already started, and I was transferred to a group that is on their way overseas. And now you're moved to the channel where you're going to be overseas. We had a very good view across the channel of the explosions that were happening on the coast of France.
On the UK side of the channel, Robert Jones had come face to face with war.
It's not natural for a person to want to kill somebody else. It's not natural. But he's now realizing that he now has to do the deed if required.
I wasn't afraid because I felt I was part of something. Everything that meant anything to anybody else always meant the same to you.
When you have a common enemy that is trying to kill you, then you don't worry about different races beside you. All you know is we will fight together to eliminate that enemy and to make sure that we get out of here alive.
July 1944. Robert Jones, John Olby, and Wellsford Daniels land at Juno Beach as members of the 2nd Canadian Corps. Their target, the city of Caen.
Caen was an important transportation hub, which were needed to be captured to facilitate the transportation of troops and goods. The Germans have always had a good army, and they had some fanatical units there, like the SS units, which were first-tier army.
Olby was inside a Sherman tank, nicknamed Lucifer by the crew.
And we didn't know what was in store for us. We were only about 12 miles up, and all hell broke loose.
German artillery and armor pummeled the Canadian and British forces.
Didn't know what the hell was going on. Somebody said we should. I just couldn't see nothing. Dust, dirt, they're out there. I'm just scared that you're twice as alert as you would have been.
Unfortunately, the infantry suffered so many casualties.
One infantry unit, the Royal Regiment of Canada, had come ashore on D-Day. But when Jones landed in July, over 50% of the regiment was gone.
By the end of August, of that 840 people who landed, there was only 150 people left. So they need to fill those spots.
They were low on infantrymen, and we found ourselves being rebadged overnight. So instead of being Armored Corps, now we're infantry.
And people like Bud Jones was a member of a Montreal-based armor unit, and he was transferred into the Royal Regiment of Canada as an infantryman with no infantry training, along with many other people.
That meant 5'5" Jones would now fight on foot, lugging the same pack as much larger soldiers.
I was always diminutive. I was never a large person. Everyone that I knew was always bigger than I was, and I wanted to be as tough as they.
He was a small guy. He weighed somewhere between 112 and 118 pounds. His kit would have weighed almost as much as him. Just to keep up with someone bigger than him, carrying all that weight is admirable. And he probably earned everyone's respect because of it.
In a few months, Robert Jones would become a section commander within his platoon. White soldiers will follow his lead. He's only 19.
This now takes Bud above the white man in his section. He now has the authority of his commanding officer to give command to everybody under his command, and they have to obey him. That's massive. That is absolutely massive.
I had a little bit more training than the average recruit. In a lot of cases, I was a lot younger than they were at. When you're, say, an 18, 19-year-old, and the majority of the men in your platoon are in their 30s, you can grow up in a hurry.
The fact that Bud would be a section commander would speak well of him, that his leadership trusted him to have the lives of other people in his hands.
When they looked among his section, I'm sure most of them were white. He had to be well above them in order for them to select him. So it's a significant decision that they made in selecting Bud as a section commander. Because here, you're the one that's gonna make sure that all the soldiers implement the order that's coming from the most senior level. And you are the guy that's gonna make them successful.
Victory at Caen came on July 19th, 1944, and John Olby confronted complete devastation.
Went through Caen. The streets were full of rubble. There's a few snipers left in buildings and the streets blood climbing over debris all day long.
Some of the cities that we went through were just devastated. And I saw many dead cows and tanks that were full of dead Germans. You could imagine that the bombing of these areas was so serious. And you could only imagine the effects on the civilians that had lived there too.
We were proud to be the trained soldiers, and you're feeling quite big. And for me, you know, with everybody taller than I was, and I was right amongst them.
As Robert Jones and the Royal Regiment of Canada chased the retreating Germans from Caen, the 1st Canadian Corps was fighting to free northern Italy.
The regiment that I was in was Infantry Support Regiment. We did most of our traveling in half-tracks. Actually, our primary duty was to support the tanks.
20-year-old Montrealer Calvin Marshall was a light machine gunner with the Westminster Regiment when it marched on Ravenna in December 1944.
We were on a night march, and the whole regiment was there, the colonel and everybody. And we were supposed to meet up with the Irish Regiment of Canada. They were going to make an assault on Ravenna. And the colonel ordered that we stop. There's no lights. Everything is black. And eventually we got separated from the main group. We were lying around outside and we could hear the Germans coming up the road. We didn't expect that there was any Germans there. At the time, the Germans were always spouting about they were the master race and the hate they had for Jews and for anything other than Germans. I was fearful that if I was taken prisoner, what they might do to me. And I'm going to tell you something. Never was so scared in my life.
December 1944. Machine gunner Calvin Marshall is part of Canada's longest army campaign to drive the German army out of northern Italy. On a night march to Ravenna, he became separated from his unit and stumbled into a German patrol.
We didn't know how many Germans there was of them.
Nazi hatred for people of color was well known to Allied soldiers. In 1940, when France fell at the Battle of France, the invaders executed between 1,000 and 1,500 French African POWs in a series of isolated killings.
You had two parts of the German army, the Wehrmacht, which was the regular army, but the SS were fiercely loyal to Hitler. And they were Nazi fanatics. To be captured by the SS was pretty much a death sentence, especially if you're Jewish. And I'd imagine it wasn't much better for our black troops either.
In the aftermath of World War I, Hitler was enraged by the French occupation force and the presence of 20,000 African soldiers within it. He made it illegal for Jews, Roma, and blacks to marry Germans. In 1937, the Nazis sterilized biracial German children. And when World War II erupted, Nazi Germany amped up its anti-black propaganda.
If you're black, you're in a heightened sense of awareness of everything around you and everyone around you.
We could hear the Germans in the back of us calling out to each other. And everybody started to run. We went up into a farmer's loft. And very, very quiet. We stayed there all night. When daylight broke, we looked out through the little thing, and we seen Canadian soldiers there. They had already had us listed as missing.
Black or white, no soldier would want to be in the hands of the enemy.
All sides sent out capture patrols to bring back enemy soldiers with valuable intel.
They have different targets, and they want to capture the individual with as much information as possible.
That meant a signalman like Welsford Daniels had a target on his back.
Often when one of our lines of communication broke down, my job was to find out what the cause was and repair it or replace the equipment. And also my concern was to travel from headquarters up to the front lines to report on what was going on.
When you got a dispatch from the signalman, you can always know that they've got some sort of information that you could potentially use to find out what the other side is doing.
And that would be by traveling by night quite a ways back, so it meant I'd be traveling over areas that were not completely cleared out and only carrying a Sten gun in the back.
War is the most dangerous environment a person can find themselves in.
Certain noises would come from the bushes or the creeks or the ditches.
So there's no stopping. This is one of those times when it's not about the journey, it's about the destination.
One time I recall being strafed by a couple of planes as I was following along the roadway. These trees sort of shielded me from the aircraft. It's rather frightening. It has an effect on you which you'll never forget.
It's a job I wouldn't want to be doing. You know, I like to be a part of a team. I don't necessarily want to be that guy that's going to be riding all by myself.
Through all the danger, Welsford never missed a chance to write to his girlfriend Gertrude back home in Montreal.
His letters were just as interesting, telling me all that was going on and what was happening. So I look forward to them. That's what kept me going, really. I'd write back and tell him what all that happened with all the others. Well, why don't you tell me about you? I said, he didn't believe that I would be working all the time, you know. He just figured I wasn't telling him what I was doing.
Unlike today where we've got text messages and we've got Facebook or whatever, back then mail would come whenever it comes. And seeing that letter, it's like an adrenaline shot. It just connects you to home.
He always wanted to know everything that I was doing. I couldn't tell him very much except because I was always working.
That acts as a motivator to make sure that when they go out and they got to fight against the enemy, that they focus on their battlecraft, right? Because it's about getting out of there and getting home, because it's going to be a warm embrace from that loved one when I get back.
But in the late summer of 1944, going home was only a dream. The Battle of Caen had just been won. Now John Olby and the 2nd Canadian Corps were about to corner the retreating Germans in a bottleneck near a small town called Falaise.
I knew I was in a war. It was in Falaise.
The Battle of Falaise Gap was a brutal bloodbath.
The Battle of Falaise Gap was important because the Americans had broken through the German defenses in the west. The British had broken through the German defenses in the north, and the Americans also were pushing and pressuring the Germans from the south. So this created pressure on 3 sides of the Germans. They were withdrawing from this pressure. The Germans had to escape this pocket through a gap that was about 8 kilometers in width. The Canadian Army was assigned the task of closing that gap.
The goal: surround the Germans and prevent them from shoring up defenses in northeastern France, Belgium, and the Netherlands.
German troops, they got wind of our army coming this way. They're going to be trapped.
After victory at Caen, John Olby is again on the move. The Canadians and their allies corner the retreating Germans in a trap near a small French town called Falaise.
The perimeter that they were defending was collapsing as they were getting pressure on all three sides, creating a pocket. Estimates vary, but about 100,000 German troops trapped in this pocket, and they had to escape. So there'd be few roads going through that 8-kilometer gap. The Canadian Army had been criticized for not closing that gap quickly enough. The Germans knew what was going on and were resisting ferociously.
Now here we came. We come up, it's supposed to be sweeping them out, and we shot everything at room.
It's not like the movies where someone is hit by a bullet and dies in his buddy arms and says, you know, tell him I'm my lover. It's, you know, body parts are being blown off, heads are being decapitated, people are being cut in half. Modern warfare is horribly destructive to the human body.
And we just kept coming. The Air Force, they sealed it off from air. And the Tiffy swooping up and down the road. Swooping up.
Troops often called it the Tiffy, was a British warplane called the Typhoon, and it was a very powerful ground attack.
They closed the gap. But there was dead horses. The Germans used a lot of horses. Dead men all bloated up, stinking, rotten. The ditches are full.
The amount of death there was so great that the Allies put a cordon around it and wouldn't let anyone in through it because of the health hazard that all those corpses presented. And pilots flying over the gap reported that they could smell it from the air hundreds of feet up.
What the thing? I could never forget that. Sally's Gap.
During the fighting, 10,000 German troops were killed in that gap, and 50,000 were captured. And some of them escaped, but they left behind 500 of their tanks while doing so, which is a big hit in terms of their capabilities.
The front fell back towards Germany. By October 1944, the liberation of Belgium had begun. For Robert Jones, the Battle of the Scheldt was ahead.
One of the difficulties that any army faces is resupply. So the port of Antwerp was captured by the British Army. The approach to it was along the estuary of Scheldt River, going through land that was dominated by the German army. The Germans could easily sink the shipping from their land-based forces. So that Scheldt estuary needed to be cleared of the German forces, and that fell to the Canadian Army to do it.
Over 6,300 Canadians were wounded, missing, or killed. Reinforcements arrived, and a war-weary Robert Jones became pals with a red-haired rookie from Brantford, Ontario, Henry Red Jeanette.
My good friend Jeanette, Red Jeanette, he taught me to play guitar all the way through. Good friends.
That's what it's about at this point, because you know that if racism kicks in, trust departs. You don't worry that I'm a white man having an indigenous person to my left and a black person to my right. You don't think about that, because all you're thinking about is we're all trained as Canadians, right, to fight against that enemy that's over there that's trying to kill us.
Infantry is a very intimate part of the army. When you're fighting on foot with people very closely. That bond of friendship that develops transcends everything. And after a while, everything goes out the window except your respect and friendship for your fellow soldier.
Jeanette and Jones fought side by side. The regimental diary recorded their bravery.
This is what our history book says about Bud Jones. Bud Jones was a member of that platoon and remembered the vicious little fight that ensued when the Germans attacked and drove his platoon back into a house. A Bren gunner, Jones took up a firing position at a window and decided that this would be the last house we would ever see. The enemy seemed to be all around us. After several attempts to rout us out of there, the enemy began tossing grenades through the windows. One hit my buddy, Red Jeanette, on the shoulder, and when he picked it up and threw it back, we all started doing the same thing as fast as we could.
The Germans were routed from the Scheldt, and supply lines were established. By April 1945, France and Belgium were liberated, and Canadian soldiers were welcomed as heroes.
The regiment and all the other Allied armies were receiving tremendous support and love from the liberated countries. There was one point the soldiers were kidnapped, and I put that in quotation marks, and willingly so, by the citizens. And the army just kind of said, let's forget about it for the day, let these guys have fun, because the civilians are so jubilant at seeing their liberators show up.
I was quite comfortable, particularly in Holland. And when I went through Holland, it seemed like every time we stopped, they would wave to you. And in my case, every family that I met seemed to want to adopt me. And to this day, I still have friends over there that I visit. It was fantastic. It was a case where you almost forgot about the fighting.
But the war was still on.
On April the 3rd of 1945, we were at a place called the Twente Canal in Holland.
The Twente Canal was the last serious fighting that the regiment did, and it was actually the last battle honor we earned during the Second World War. The battalion endured and beat off 15 attacks by the Germans on that one day. 15.
When we crossed the canal, there was a large barn and we occupied. And then we attacked the house and drove the enemy out of the house. And it was my platoon that did that, so we consolidated around the outside of the house that night.
Jones's platoon dug in.
I usually like to sleep early because first light, if you're going to get a counterattack, is usually when the enemy usually attack at first light. Red Jeanette was shaving, and I was getting ready to change over with him when the Germans threw in a counterattack. Red grabbed his rifle. And went out the front door, and I'm calling him back.
April 3rd, 1945, Eastern Netherlands. Robert Jones and Red Jeanette are caught in a surprise attack.
Red was lying there shot. They killed him right off. I didn't know whether to leave him there or whether to get the rest of them out. We were getting yelled at to withdraw, so I got the rest of them out. But at the same time, Red was left there.
Bud was very protective of Red, and Bud felt responsible. The black-white friendship that Bud and Red had was much more the norm than people would believe.
That deep battlefield bond lasted only 6 months. 60 kilometers south, at Wiesel, Germany, Welsford Daniels witnessed his last big battle.
That afternoon, the sky was just littered with parachutists, planes. This was just part of the battle that we'd been seeing so often take place. So it was just one more battle, and this was the last push. After that, the war was over.
Today is Victory in Europe Day. Long live the cause of freedom.
May 8th, 1945, VE Day.
I'll never forget it. I can still remember that day when they said that it was over.
Came out of it with many memories, and thank goodness that we were on the winning side.
If I had to do something like that, I would go back, yes. Because we were fighting for democracy, of equality of all people. All for one and one for all.
Everybody was so happy, and people, you know, more or less adopted the Canadians. We got along very good.
Europeans embraced their liberators.
With anticipation and joy in their hearts, tempered by the memories of the friends they have lost, the Canadians who have survived will be returning home to Canada. I believe that the future of Canada rests in their hands. It will be a grand future should they be given the opportunity in peace to prove and practice the admirable characteristics they have demonstrated in war.
Shaken, relieved, Canadian soldiers began to return home.
They gave us the amount of money that when you arrived back in Montreal, they would cash. And I remember everybody's on the boat haphazardly gambling, playing poker. I remember when I got back here, I was pretty near broke.
We didn't get home until sometime in January.
After 3 years apart, Gertrude and Welsford reunite.
I was down there waving, and he was waving back at me. We got together, and we went to his mother's home, and spent the day there and talked. It was quite something, just glad to see him back safely. That was the main thing.
For many Canadian soldiers, the war had created battlefield friendships that seemed to transcend race.
We've interviewed many, many, many veterans, and coming back to Canada was where they experienced the most racism.
The black men coming back knew that when they came back to Canada, that the unity that they had as a member of the military would be gone. So one fight ends, and you go back to the original fight.
The fight for civil rights continued in places like Dresden, Ontario.
Two black soldiers dressed in their uniforms walk into McKay's restaurant, which is in Dresden. Mr. McKay himself was a returning vet and refused those two young men service.
In a 1949 referendum, Dresden residents voted against a bill that would have made local shopkeepers serve black customers.
I haven't got anything against the colored people. They've made a mess in their own nest.
Yeah. Do you think they have a lot of support or not?
Been backed by the people from outside.
Yeah. Who are these people? Do you think?
Well, there's the colored people from some of the big organizations in the States. There's the communists that are looking for trouble all the time, and there's the Jews.
If we can't come out of battle unified and having that solid relationship, when are we going to do it?
After the war, you would think things would change. They remain the same. It certainly didn't improve the racial tensions in this community. They knew they were accepted and loved, but they certainly were not given what the white soldiers were given. I don't think they were given enough credit. In the factories, they were good enough to shove a broom, but they were never good enough to run those machines.
John Olby returned to Chatham, where today, at 99 years old, he's one of the last surviving Black Canadian veterans of World War II.
Tell him what your last job was. It was a millwright.
Yeah, I took a correspondence course to be a millwright. It was a long journey, but I passed. And I got a job at the American Can Company. And I was there for several years. And Ollie and I lived with my parents. And now we got on our own, piece by piece. We stayed in the same building. In fact, we're there now. And it's been kind to us, and we've been kind to it. We're a great family there.
With the military, they did offer veteran benefits. So a lot of men who might not have been able to afford to go to university or what have you, they took advantage of those benefits and went to further their education.
Some of the most iconic to me, Stanley Grizzell and Lincoln Alexander. Lincoln went into politics, changing the system by becoming an individual who became a part of the system. I look at Stanley. He fought to improve the system, and the system rewarded him for hard work by becoming a judge. So here are individuals who came through the war, right? And they were able to become influencers and decision makers in their own right.
Sam Estwick remained in the Air Force.
My father's experiences when he got back to Canada after the war were defined by his uniform.
I found that what we now call radar, we were so far advanced in electronics that some of the friends I met who had electrical engineering degrees didn't know as much about electronics as I knew.
Estwick was among the Canadian experts who set up the first early warning system designed to detect a Russian air attack on North America.
I don't think at the time he recognized how significant his actions were, being at the forefront of positions in the military.
Estwick retired with the rank of flight lieutenant. He passed away in 2008 at the age of 92.
At his funeral, the volume of people who showed up in uniform, and they said, "We are here to recognize what your father did for us, to allow us to be in the jobs we're in today." And I thought that was a really strong message. That really, really moved me. They laid poppies on the memorial there. It was a really, really moving recognition.
At any point in the war, anyone in the Army, at the front lines, in a combat zone, was at the risk of death, wounding, or capture. And anyone who fought there or participated in there certainly deserves our respect.
The history of Canada is the history of everyone in it. There are individuals throughout history, and I do believe my father is one of them, who have made significant moves and done something of significance that changed the country. He's by far not the only one. There's hundreds of them.
These men formed that chain link and pull people up with them so that they're saying, hey, come on up to the next level and see what's possible. And then all of a sudden, we're seeing the community is growing because these men dared to dream.
After the war, Robert Jones struggled to return to normal life.
Well, it's hard. My mother and my father found that out because I actually came back suffering from post-traumatic stress at the time and didn't recognize what it was.
I've spoken to the families of veterans of the Second World War whose fathers dealt with horrific conditions in battle and survived and came home after the war and said that their father was always angry, was difficult to deal with, impatient, and it created a stressful situation for the family for years after the war. Every person's going to handle it differently. Some people don't handle it at all.
I got myself into boxing. I was told by the doctor to find something strenuous to do. I tried it. It turned out pretty good, so I thought I could beat anybody in the world. The first thing I did was won the Quebec Bowling Glove Championship. And then in 1948, I was Dominion champion.
When I look at Bud, I see the medals all over his chest. You know, the left side, the right side. That soldier that you would want to emulate.
All my friends called me Buddy when I was young, but now that I got older, it's Bud. Having a name or a nickname like that, it forms your character.
60 years after the war, Jones returned to the Netherlands with politicians and veterans to remember soldiers who'd made the ultimate sacrifice, like Red Jeanette.
I was more or less under the auspices of Veterans Affairs. We went back and I visited his grave. They have his record and everything in the Brantford Library, but it had to be me to go online and dig it out and get a picture of it. They don't know his history. All they know is that he went overseas and he was killed in Holland.
In 1975, Jones retired from the Army as a sergeant. He passed away on September 2nd, 2021, at a nursing home in Ottawa. He was 96. Owen Rowe retired from the military after the war. He devoted his life to social work and became a diplomat for the government of Barbados. But his experience in the Canadian military remained his guiding light.
This mission to share the story of my father as well as the veterans that fought for Canada in the Second World War and beyond is very important to me. It's a promise I made to my dad before he passed away. And it makes me a little emotional.
Rowe passed away on April 16th, 2005. 2 months later, the Canadian War Museum honored his wish and unveiled a plaque recognizing the service and sacrifice of West Indian World War II veterans.
They got the job done. They went over with a task. The task was, 1, to be a part of a team. 2, to seek out, close with, and destroy the enemy. 3, to come back home alive. They did all 3 of them. There were other challenges that they faced on top of all of that, but they were still able to come back and then to change society. Oh, they got the job done.
When we think of Remembrance Day, we often think of that poem in Flanders Field. But will you share a poem that you wrote?
Okay. It's called Soldier's Farewell, and these were the words. Land of my birth, O dearest earth, beneath whose shining skies I toil. I I must now leave thy sacred soil and risk my blood on foreign lands to save thee from the harsh demands which tyrants heartless would impose, if none to freedom's call arose. I go with warm tears in my eyes, for I shall miss thy smiling skies, the rapture of thy myriad stars, those festive nights with soft guitars, my love, and all that I hold dear, which just in dreams can now be near. Land of my birth, so filled with mirth, I go, and I may not return, but fires of my love shall burn for thee bright as thy noonday sun, sure as the victory to be won.